Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. You're listening to the longest running superhero role playing game on Earth. I'm your host, the Game Master, and today we're talking about the return of Steve Trevor, as well as red lanterns, gold lanterns, green lanterns, violet lanterns, etc. But before we get into all that, smash like, make sure you're subscribed, and leave us a comment. That helps us out with the YouTube algorithm, but also we love to hear from you guys. We've got an awesome community here, and that's thanks to you. So thank you so much for being here. So, having said all that, let's dive in. The prologue to today's story takes place in the Hollow Earth known as Skartaris. In a recent game, the SDF-1 blasted a hole where Mansfield, Ohio used to be, destroying the embodiment of all chaos, evil, and magic in the universe, an object that the Green Lantern Corps refers to as the Star Heart. After that, various fantasy genre threats arose from the pit and threatened the surface world. So that end of the tunnel was capped. But now in this video, several heroes are here in the center of the earth trying to cap the other end of the tunnel. The Gold Lantern, formerly known as Powerhouse 1, is here, and he has the power ring that used to belong to Gnort. That ring is special because the Guardians of the Universe removed the restrictions from it. The Guardians were all about balance. Part of that meant that they thought everything had its place, even that which is ridiculous. So while most rings have requirements like you need to have a spirit of 12 or higher, or a willpower of 15 or better, as well as the iron nerves advantage, in the case of Gnort's power ring, all of that was switched off by the Guardians before Parallax tried to wipe them all out. Gnort's ring was passed on to Kelson Barber then in late March of 1996, and his attributes were pretty low compared to most members of the Green Lantern Corps. Yet, Gnort's ring did not reject Kelson, nor did it seek out a new host when Kelson met his demise during the big crisis of 97. Instead, Kelson's best friend, Powerhouse, kept that ring. And shortly before 9/11, Powerhouse willed Kelson's one ring to become many rings, which he then used to try to restart the Green Lantern Corps by giving copies of Gnort's ring to multiple new lanterns. So now, about 30 years after Gnort was killed at the hands of Juggernaut, several characters have a copy of that ring, including one of the many clones of Arthur Pendragon that was created using Mirror Master's old mirror gun. Karissa Kókkino Yefyrákis, who is a white-skinned alien with black stripes, was given one of these rings. And she, by the way, was inspired by the cover of Heavy Metal Magazine, Volume 9, Issue Number 7, which was published in October of 1985. The cover art, by the way, was done by Olivia. It was very, very cool. As a brief aside, when I went to the Art Institute of Pittsburgh, there was a store not too far from there called Ides, as in the Ides of March. And I got to tell you, Ides was the coolest slash biggest comic book store I have ever been to. They started up in 1972, and to the best of my knowledge, they are still there. And honestly, I could do an entire podcast episode about this store. I owned my own comic book store, and even my store wasn't as cool as Ides was. I like Ides more than my own store. Ides had a pool hall upstairs, and the main floor was sort of like a record store. And when I lived in Pittsburgh, anyways, the basement of Ides had Transformers that they had ordered for the store in 1984, and they were still mint in box in 1994. Nobody had ever bought them. I guess they just weren't popular there, or it was the wrong demographic, whatever. So I was buying G1 Transformers from Ides in the 90s at the same price they had marked them at back in the 80s. Also, in the basement, they had just about every single issue of Heavy Metal magazine ever. And I bought those up left and right too. And when I found the issue with the quote unquote zebra woman on the cover, we were inspired to make the Karissa character in our game. Around that same time, in the mid 90s, we also made Liadin Droichead, who was a mermaid. In both DC and Marvel, we see mermaids show up repeatedly, especially in stories about Aquaman or Namor the Submariner. So our thinking was that if there are multiple races that live on Earth, why are only humans ever becoming members of the Green Lantern Corps? And the disadvantage of the character having a tail was sort of neutralized by the fact that the ring gives the user the gift of flight. So I thought that was cool. We really liked her. Next is Pavitra Rakta Setu. We made her in 3rd edition GURP Supers, which has an advantage called extra arms, which is pretty self-explanatory. But then they also have a different advantage called full coordination, which simply put means that if you have, say, 6 arms, then that means you get 6 turns per round. So for years, she was kind of like a Street Fighter style character who focused only on martial arts. Then one day we were like, hey, what if we gave her 6 power rings? So that's basically her in a nutshell, right? She's, in my opinion, she's pretty awesome. I really like her. Next up is Speaker for Inner Demon, who comes from an alien race known as the Ant-Men. They were created by the late, great Dave Eckelberger back in the early 2000s. They have caste system, and each caste has its own hive mind. Dave had another character named the Inner Demon, who was similar to Venom in that it was an alien symbiote. But unlike Venom, it retained the personalities of its previous hosts. In the end, the Ant-Men took that symbiote back to their homeworld, and a new caste was born. Most of the Ant-Men don't speak English, but they will designate the one who has a universal translator as a speaker for that caste. So if we're talking about, say, the Navigator class, or the Navigator caste, rather, which is their specialty, and there's half a dozen Ant-Men, who walk up to you, the one with the universal translator then will introduce himself as speaker for Navigator. Hopefully that makes sense. If not, let me know in the comments and I'll try to do a better job of explaining it. Anyway, so Speaker for Inner Demon has all the memories of all of Dave's characters because at one time or another, they all wore that symbiote. When last we saw Speaker, he was living with Powerhouse. So between games, we are saying now that Powerhouse gave him one of those Green Lantern rings that I mentioned earlier. And speaking of Powerhouse, the first, he's here too. Not too awful long ago, he was taken more than 1,000 years into one of many possible futures where he helped the Legion of Superheroes fight a kaiju-sized red dragon. Powerhouse used one of the green rings as a tool in that battle because previously to that, he had been stripped of his natural powers by a variant of Dr. Manhattan from an alternate universe. in an adventure that we ran that was loosely inspired by the recent Countdown comic book series. Anyways, so Powerhouse was using a Green Lantern ring again, for the first time in a really long time. But the battle lasted for such a long time that his ring eventually ran out of energy. So the 31st century Guardians of the Universe gave him a new gold lantern ring. So now Powerhouse goes by the moniker of the Gold Lantern, while his son is now going by the title of Powerhouse 2. Also, here are some violet lanterns, also known as star sapphires. One of them is the younger sister of Tachyon, and their father was a Green Lantern back in the day. That's a long story that's beyond the scope of today's video, but the basic gist is that his power ring had an effect on his DNA. So when he had kids, they inherited some of the ring's Omni-Power. So since Mr. Johnson's daughter already had ring-based powers, giving her a ring seemed like a good fit. And after a while, we decided a violet ring would actually be a better fit for her than the green ring was. And last but not least is Felicity of the Omega Men. My wife has played her on several occasions, and at first, we kind of ran her like DC's answer to a Marvel heroine named Tigra. But in the comics, Felicity often wore a skimpy costume, kind of reminded me of Vampirilla's costume in terms of the shape. It's sort of like those old 1980s swimsuits that basically just look like a pair of trunks with some kind of like suspenders added. You know what I mean? Anyways, in the case of Felicity, her costume in the comics was also often purple. So we noticed that when they redesigned the Star Sapphire costume in the 2000s, it reminded us a lot of Felicity's costume. So that's why we made her a Violet Lantern. We thought that was a good fit visually. And then having a power ring allowed her to go on a wider range of adventures than she could otherwise. Which brings us to what the lanterns are doing right now. Like I said at the start of the video, the SDF-1 fired a beam weapon that laser cut a precise hole in one side of the Earth and out the exact opposite side. The various fantasy creatures of Skitaris began to invade the surface world, so the heroes put a cap on that end in an earlier adventure, and now they're putting a cap on this end down on the Hollow Earth. And as they are doing this, Guy Gardner shows up. And Guy's not a villain, but I personally would argue that he's not exactly a hero either. Anti-hero is probably the best word to describe him. Guy Gardner is known for his loud, arrogant, and abrasive personality, while often depicted as a hot-headed jerk with a massive ego. He is also defined by his unwavering willpower and determination, which make him uniquely effective, but unpopular. And on more than one occasion, he has been a Red Lantern because of his temper. And just as the Gold Lantern still hangs on to his friend's old Green Lantern ring, so too did Guy Gardner hang on to his old red ring. And recently, Guy Gardner and Steve Trevor joined the new Outsiders team. At first, Steve Trevor wore the Patriot costume, which gave him the same powers as Wonder Woman. But when he and Wonder Woman came to blows, Diana destroyed the Patriot costume. Steve was angry, and Green Arrow said they could put that anger to good use. So it is now that we learn what exactly that means when Steve Trevor shows up wearing Guy Gardner's old Red Lantern power ring. Guy sensed that the other Green Lanterns were here using his life sense power, which has a limitation on it that it can only detect other Green Lanterns. And while Guy was probably just going to show up and run his mouth some, Steve Trevor sees one of King Arthur's clones is here, And Steve cannot contain his rage. He surprise attacks Arthur, rolling double threes and then a 5 and a 6 for a grand total of 17, which is 2 column shifts. So this Arthur's body drops from 12 to -8. So on round 1, the clone of Arthur is knocked out. Steve roars and wants to hit him again and finish him off, but he had to fly over to where Arthur was on the map, and that was an automatic action. Attacking was his dice action, so all he has left is one last automatic action. So Steve subs his force manipulation for a red 25 AP force field. I should probably mention, too, that when DC Comics revealed the different colored lantern cores, they said that the colored power rings at the ends of the spectrum, which would be the red lantern core and the violet lantern core, they said that those colors actually control the person that wears the ring, while green is the color in the middle. Like, think of Roy G. Biv, right? So green is right there in the middle. And in the case of green, it's the wearer who controls the ring and not vice versa. That means that somebody with a blue ring mostly controls that ring, but the blue ring does have some sway in their personality, though, making the wearer have a little more hope than they would without wearing the ring. Likewise, in the case of indigo, since it's next to purple on the color wheel, the indigo ring has some degree of control over you, but not as much as the purple ring would. So indigo compels you to experience compassion, but it's not an absolute, right? Likewise, since orange is next to red on the color wheel, orange for sure is going to bring out the greed in the wearer, but it's not total control. And since yellow is next to green, the guys with the yellow rings mostly control the ring, but not entirely, right? The reason I mention all of that is because Steve Trevor's red ring is for sure controlling him, right? All of Steve's anger that he has because his own wife rejected him and now she's with another man. And for that matter, Steve was a government man, right? He literally gave his life for his country. But now, if you want to be really technical about it, his country no longer exists, right? And he sees all of this as Arthur's fault. And Steve has so much hate for him in his heart that he is to the he is to the Red Lantern Corps what Hal Jordan is to the Green Lantern Corps. When we say Hal is the greatest Green Lantern who ever lived, that's a big deal in the comics. We're saying in our game that Steve Trevor, because of what has happened to him in the Earth K setting, has so much hate and so much anger that he is like the greatest Red Lantern to ever live, right? So Steve has 25 APs of force manipulation, and right now he wants to use all of it to make sure that all the Arthurs are extinct. Anyway, so now that the initial surprise attack thing is over with, everybody rolls initiative. And the initiative order is Omni-Girl, then Powerhouse, then Speaker, then Karissa, then Felicity, then Guy Gardner, then Pavitra, then Liadin, and then finally Steve Trevor. So on Omni-Girl's turn, she subs the force manipulation of her violet ring for an energy blast. And while her blast hits its target, she cannot get through Steve's force field of 25. so no damage is actually inflicted. On her remaining turn, she subs Omni-Power for regeneration, usable on others, and she uses that to restore some of Arthur's hit points. Then it's Powerhouse's turn. He has fewer APs of power than Red Lantern Steve Trevor does. So Powerhouse subs his Omni-Power for Power Reserve, which he then has fuel his willpower, right? So when it bumps up his willpower, that means, because will is what your Omni-Power is derived from. So that means the Omni-Power goes up more. So that means the willpower goes up more, right? So in other words, Powerhouse is charging up to unleash a super attack, but it's not ready yet. So that was his turn. Next, Speaker goes. And since the Ant-Men are a very peaceful race, Speaker tries to use his charisma skill to calm Steve down, and that does not work at all. Then it is Karissa's turn. And out of all the heroes, she is the one who's probably the most aggressive. So she blames Guy Gardner for this mess, for giving Steve Trevor a red ring. And Karissa blasts Guy Gardner. She rolls a 10 and a 4, which earns 1 column shift. Guy's body of 10 drops to a body of -7. So before he even gets a turn, Guy Gardner is knocked out, which reminded us of the time that Batman knocked out Guy Gardner in one punch. So that was kind of a cool moment, in our humble opinion. Next up is Felicity, who has a dexterity of 10 APs. She declares active dodge, so her dexterity is raised to a 20, making her harder to hit. Felicity was an exotic dancer at a space station in the Vega system, so we said her active dodge looks very dance-like as she sort of cartwheels around. Pavitra then goes, not once, but 6 times. Each one of her 6 power rings fires an energy blast at Steve Trevor. Unfortunately, because she has a will of 15, that means she needs to roll an 18 or better to get through that 25 AP force field of his. So she fails, then hits, then fails 3 times more, and then on her last roll, she got double 2s, and then a 5 and a 1 for a grand total of 10. So even though she rolled double, she still managed to fail. So that was frustrating. That one that did get through, though, did 3 points of damage. Liadin is the last hero to go. She fires an energy blast, rolling 5 and a 7, which hits, but it still doesn't do any damage because of that darn force field. On Steve Trevor's turn, he rolls a 4 and a 9, which gives him 1 extra column shift. Omni-Girl had gotten Arthur some hit points back, but now Steve Trevor knocks Arthur down to a body of -5. So we're back to the top of the order. Omni-Girl spends all of her turns healing Arthur, and she actually wakes him up. And then on Arthur's turn, he erects a force field around himself. Next up is Powerhouse again, aka the Gold Lantern, who finally unleashes that big blast of his, and he destroys Steve Trevor's force field. And while that force field is down, Karissa hits Steve Trevor with an energy blast, taking his body of 12 down to a body of -1. So Steve Trevor is knocked out. That brings us to the epilogue. Couple of the more inexperienced heroes try to take off Steve Trevor's Red Lantern ring. But in the DC Heroes RPG, when a gadget is listed on a character sheet and it is written in all caps, that means it actually cannot be removed. And since that's what they do with the Green Lantern rings, then for years we have said in our game that when a lantern is knocked out, you cannot take that ring off. So the problem of this whole game session has not been fully resolved yet. Omni-Girl subs her own Omni-Power for time stop, so she pauses Steve Trevor in time, but she can't hold out forever. At some point, he's going to wake up. He's going to sub his own Omni-Power for regeneration, and then he's going to go right back to being a problem again. So this episode ends with the heroes talking about what they should do. We ran out of time on game day, and we had to stop playing. And by stopping here, my players knew that would give them a week to kind of think about this problem and brainstorm solutions. So we're going to pick up where we left off here this Sunday when we play again. But yeah, that was it for this one. We enjoyed playing it. We hope you enjoyed hearing about it. If so, as always, we would love it if you took a quick moment of your time to smash like, make sure you're subscribed, and leave us a comment. And from all of us here at the longest running superhero role-playing game on Earth, we hope you have a good one, and we'll see you in the next adventure. Bye.